Attack of the Cybermen Part 1 was broadcast on January 5, 1985, kicking off Doctor Who's 22nd season. Part 1 saw the highest viewing figures of the season with 8.9 million viewers, and Part 2 showing a significant decrease to 7.2 million. The return of the Cybermen in 1982's Earthshock had been a popular success for Doctor Who. As a result, producer John Nathan Turner and script editor Eric Saward, who had written Earthshock, were eager to use the venerable monsters to lead off the Sixth Doctor's first full season in 1985. Saward did approach the co-creator of the Cybermen, Gerry Davis, who had delivered a brief outline. Saward, however, felt that this outline was too dated for the 1980s and was subsequently dropped. Saward, a fan of the Cybermen, was keen to tackle the serial himself. Indeed, he hoped that this would be one of 2 adventures he would contribute to Season 22. He had missed out on the chance to write a Doctor Who story the previous year because Industrial Action had delayed his scripts for Resurrection of the Daleks from Season 20 to Season 21. JNT, however, was keen to avoid the wrath of the Writers' Guild, which would take a dim view of Doctor Who's script editor commissioning himself for 1/3 of the year's output. He informed Saward that he would only be permitted to write the season finale, Revelation of the Daleks. Nevertheless, Saward turned to disc jockey and music producer Ian Levine, a long-time Doctor Who fan who had been acting as a continuity advisor to the production office. Levine had unsuccessfully proposed several plot ideas in recent years, and Saward now suggested that they could collaborate on a storyline for the Cybermen story. In late 1983, Levine put together an outline entitled Return to Telos. It was agreed that this would draw heavily on the Cyberman stories of the 60s, most notably their 1966 debut adventure, The 10th Planet, in which their home planet Mondas is destroyed in 1986, and 1967's The Tomb of the Cybermen, which established the existence of the cyber installation on Telos. It appears that Saward then augmented Levine's outline with his own creations, including the mercenary Lytton, first introduced in the previous season's Resurrection of the Daleks, and the Cryons. With the latter, Saward attempted to devise a realistic race of aliens in which each member possessed a distinct personality, as opposed to the monolithic throngs usually portrayed in science fiction. The notion of the Doctor attempting to repair the TARDIS chameleon circuit, meanwhile, came from JNT. He saw this as an excellent publicity vehicle since he knew that the press would not be able to resist hints that the Time Machine might be losing its traditional police box form. Given JNT's edict, there was no question of Saward being credited as the story's scriptwriter. Furthermore, Levine's working relationship with the Doctor Who production office was maintained with the understanding that he would not receive an on-screen acknowledgement. As a result, Saward turned to writer and teacher Paula Woolsey, an ex-girlfriend with whom he was still on good terms with. Woolsey had also performed some research for Saward's first Doctor Who serial, The Visitation. Officially, Woolsey would be the scriptwriter of the story, resulting from Levine and Saward's work, which was now entitled The Cold War. The true extent of Woolsey's input into the scripts is somewhat unclear. Some sources suggest that Saward wrote them in their entirety, and Woolsey's only role was to serve as a figurehead to mislead JNT. Other sources indicate that Woolsey did write draft scripts, although these were then considerably revised by Saward, at least in part because of Woolsey's lack of experience in television writing. Saward himself had suggested that even the storyline was largely Woolsey's creation, and he simply worked with her to incorporate the Cybermen, the Cryons and Lytton. Levine, however, has denied this assertion. Regardless, on January 10, 1984, Woolsey was commissioned to script Part 1 of The Cold War. The second and final instalment was then requested on February 21st. These episodes were both to be 45 minutes long. In keeping with the plan agreed upon in the spring of 1983 to modernise the Doctor Who format, whereas Season 21 had consisted of 26 instalments of 25 minutes duration broadcast twice weekly, Season 22 would be made up of 13 weekly episodes, each 3/4 of an hour long. This would mark the first major format change for Doctor Who since it premiered in 1963, and brought the programme in line with the rest of the BBC's drama lineup. By the spring of 1984, considerable work remained to be done on the Cold War, now designated Serial 6T. At this time, Matthew Robinson joined the production as director. He had previously worked on Resurrection of the Daleks for Season 21. Saward and Robinson collaborated on the final draft scripts, with much of their effort concerned with simplifying the plot developments in Episode 2. Whilst Part 1 of the original script and the televised version more or less remained the same, Part 2's final version differed heavily from the original script. One idea was that it was revealed that a colony of Cryons is living inside Halley's Comet. Lytton's job was to convince the Cybermen to use the comet as the agent of the Earth's destruction in order to lure the Cyber Controller there, where he would be ambushed by the Cryons. This scheme is uncovered by the Cybermen, who then turn against Lytton. It was planned that all of the Telos material would be studio-bound. However, late in the day, Serial 6T gained additional money for location filming. This prompted Saward to introduce Stratton and Bates and add scenes onto the surface of Telos, allowing him to emphasise the Telos-based elements of the plot earlier than had previously been the case. Saward also come to enjoy the character of Griffiths and decided to postpone his demise, which was meant to take place near the end of the opening episode. Robinson, meanwhile, was concerned about the lack of female characters and decided that all of the Cryons should be women. Varn and Flast were initially intended to be male. Finally, the title became Attack of the Cybermen, while it was agreed that the author's credit will refer to the pseudonym Paula Moore. Shortly before recording began, Robinson found himself scrambling to adjust its cast. The actor initially chosen to portray Stratton was Trevor Raymond, but he suffered a broken arm and had to drop out of the production. He was replaced by Jonathan David, who had been hired to play the Cyber Lieutenant. David in turn was replaced by Brian Orrell, while Orrell's original role as a Cyberman was taken by John Ainley. Filming began on May 29th at a variety of London locales. The scene in which Lytton's mob reconnaissance the diamond merchants was recorded outside the Dartmouth Castle pub. The diamond merchants' premises were actually the offices of United International Pictures. The junkyard on Totter's Lane was really the London scrapyard. Finally, the sequence of the Doctor tracing the signal was filmed on Davis Road. The next 2 days were spent recording all of the material on the surface of Telos. Eager to maintain continuity with the Tomb of the Cybermen, Levine had prevailed upon Robinson to follow its lead in representing Telos with the quarry owned by the Gerrards Cross Sand and Ballast Company at Wopsey's Wood, Buckinghamshire. It was planned that the Cybermen in these scenes would be dressed in blue overalls and globe helmets to imply the hostile nature of Telos' surface. However, it was found that these additions made the monsters look really ridiculous, and they were subsequently dropped. Finally, cast and crew returned to London on June the 1st for the scenes in the garage used by Lytton's gang, which were recorded at Cameron's Scrap Merchant. Model filming followed on the 7th and 8th at the BBC model stage. Also on June the 7th, Doctor Who appeared to have scored a casting coup when American model and actress Koo Stark, best known as the star of the 1976 erotic film Emily, but at the time making headlines for her relationship with Prince Andrew, was cast as Varn, after having originally been offered the role of Rost. A photocall featuring Stark, Colin Baker and Faith Brown, who would go on to play Flast, was held on June the 12th. Just 2 days later, however, a contract dispute led JNT to dismiss Stark from Attack of the Cybermen. She was then replaced by Sarah Green, a friend of Robinson's. The first studio session for Serial 6T took place on June 21st and 22nd in BBC Television Centre Studio 6. The cyberbase on Earth was featured on both days, while the TARDIS scenes were recorded on the 21st and the sewer material on the 22nd. Rehearsals then began for the second studio block, which would encompass all of the Telos sequences. The costume and makeup for the Cryons continued to evolve during this time. The silvery wisps of hair near the mouth were a particularly late addition, suggested by JNT to help conceal the join between the mask and the actor's skin. The remaining studio days spanned July 6 to 8th and also took place in TC6. Levine was again successful in persuading Robinson to harken back to the Tomb of the Cybermen, with Michael Gilgareth hired to reprise his role as the Cyber Controller after a gap of 18 years. However, Levine was very disappointed to discover that a completely new design for the Cyber Tombs had been conceived. Instead of being cocooned behind a semi-transparent membrane on several levels of scaffolding, the Cybermen would now lie dormant within a single row of pods, each hidden behind a door. This was a result of the serial's budget limitations and also caused concern for Robinson, but JNT felt that so few viewers would be aware of this discrepancy that he could not justify the added expense. The first day of the new block was devoted to scenes in and around the refrigeration unit. Material in the tombs was taped on the 7th, and the remaining Telos sequences were then completed on July the 8th, including those in the Cyber Laboratory, the ductwork and the Cryon Caverns. Scenes used for the rehearsal script were cut when the episodes were overrunning. These scenes include Lytton's garage lockup, which was originally intended to be studio-bound, but a suitable location was used instead. Originally in this scene, a Cryon voice was to be heard as Lytton switches on the transmitter, but this may have been removed to keep Lytton's true intentions hidden for the viewer. The Doctor and Perry also debated whether there is life on Halley's Comet, which would have been appropriate setup for the colony of Cryons that were originally going to inhabit it. Perry highlighting the cultural differences of the UK and US were also cut from the transmitted version. The Doctor was also to discover Lytton's transmitter after he, Perry and Russell climbed out of the pit, and realising this is where Lytton got it from, and what his motives for his series of robberies were. The second episode was intended to be entirely studio-bound, but seems to support the idea that the script was rewritten specifically to incorporate location material. The rogue Cyberman you see briefly around the tombs was part of a scene where two other Cybermen attempt to revive members of their race, but they botch it. The rogue was scripted to even rip off the arm of another Cyberman. Furthermore, the Cyber Controller was not going to appear until Part 2, when he orders the rogue to be destroyed. His first appearance was pushed forward to Episode 1, given that Stratton and Bates were added to the script, and most of the scenes involving him revolve around being reported about their escape. Before the Doctor is imprisoned in the Vasteel freezer, he was originally taken before the Controller. The Controller thinks the Doctor would make a valuable hostage, as them changing history would anger the Time Lords. Whilst Perry was unconscious, the Kryons even discuss what to do with Perry, with Varn even finding Perry attractive. Now, bear in mind, the Kryons were going to be male in the original script, but I am glad they were cut because we don't need another alien lusting after Perry. The Kryon base on the comet was supposed to be a survival colony for them after the Cybermen massacred most of their race, and even planned to lure the Controller to the comet so they can destroy him once and for all. Litton's torture in the original script was to get him to confess his true loyalties to the Kryons and their base on the comet. The Controller's response to this was that when Mondas returns, it will shoot the comet and its occupants down. To summarise, I think it's a shame that some of these changes were cut, as the ideas presented are pretty interesting and might have made the serial more coherent for viewers. This was to be the final Doctor Who story directed by Matthew Robinson, although he was scheduled to work on The Nightmare Fair, the intended premiere adventure of Season 23, prior to the BBC's decision to postpone Doctor Who. Robinson would go on to direct episodes of EastEnders, Bergerac and Biker Grove. Biker Grove was Robinson's own creation, and he also served as its executive producer, a position he would later occupy on EastEnders. Robinson then became head of drama at BBC Wales before moving to Cambodia, where he produced the HIV drama Taste of Life, and formed a movie production company called Khmer Makong Films. Attack of the Cybermen was Paula Woolsey's only Doctor Who story. She submitted 2 further story ideas independently of Saward after completing the Cyberman story, but these were abandoned in the wake of the production shake-up brought about by the postponement of Season 23. Attack of the Cybermen would remain Woolsey's only broadcast television script. The Sixth Doctor's attempts to repair the TARDIS systems, in particular the chameleon circuit, which enables the ship to alter its external form to something more suitable than the police box, caused the ship to behave chaotically in flight. The Doctor eventually manages to pilot the TARDIS to Earth in the year 1985, where he shows Perry Halley's comet, although she is more worried about the prospect of crashing into it. On Earth, the former Dalek mercenary Lytton has taken up a new life as a London gangster, and is plotting a £10 million diamond raid with his cohorts Griffiths, Payne and Russell. They intend to enter the bank through the sewers, but Lytton activates a strange transmitter before they enter. This emits a distress signal that the Doctor picks up, and he lands the TARDIS in a scrapyard in Totter's Lane to investigate. The TARDIS changes shape to a rather conspicuous ornamental dresser, and after searching the area he determines that the transmitter is a dummy, and returns to the TARDIS to find the real source. They arrive at the sewer entrance and find the transmitter, but are held up by 2 policemen who are under Lytton's control. In the sewers, Payne falls behind the other 3 and is beaten to death by the force that attacked the workers. Lytton and the others come to a dead end and find a Cyberman approaching them. Griffiths shoot it, but Lytton disarms and surrenders to the Cybermen, who have a base in the sewers. Russell flees and encounters the Doctor and Perry, and reveals himself to be an undercover police officer who is investigating Lytton. On the Cybermen's adopted homeworld of Telos, 2 slaves, Bates and Stratton, escape from their work party and decapitate a Cyberman. They use its helmet to disguise Stratton as a Cyberman and enter cyber control. The Cybermen have captured a time-travelling vessel from Bates and Stratton, who intend to reclaim it and escape from Telos. The Doctor, Perry and Russell return to the TARDIS, where they are ambushed by the Cybermen, who have brought Lytton and Griffiths with them. Russell manages to kill 2 of them, but is then killed himself, and the Cyber leader orders the other Cybermen to kill Perry. The Doctor threatens to self-destruct the TARDIS if the Cybermen do not release Perry. The leader agrees and reveals that the Cyber Controller is still alive on Telos. The Doctor is forced to set a course for Telos and is imprisoned in one of the TARDIS rooms along with Perry, Lytton and Griffiths. During the journey he tells Perry and Griffiths the history of Telos and its former inhabitants, the Kryons, whom the Cybermen wiped out in order to use their refrigerated cities to keep themselves in cryogenic stasis. The Doctor notes that Lytton seems oddly familiar with the history of the Cybermen, Telos and the Kryons. On Telos, most of the hibernating Cybermen have become damaged and go on a rampage, destroying anything in their path when revived. The TARDIS survives, but in the depths of the Cybermen's cryogenic tombs rather than in cyber control. Just as the Cybermen prepare to take the fall there, a damaged Cyberman breaks out of its tomb and destroys another one before the leader disposes of it. Lytton, Griffiths and Perry escape in the confusion, but the Doctor does not. Perry is nearly killed by another rampaging Cyberman before 2 Kryons, who it turns out are not extinct and have been sabotaging the tombs, resulting in the damaged Cybermen, deal with it and take Perry to safety. Lytton and Griffiths meet another Cryon, and it transpires that Lytton has been working for them all along. Griffiths is offered £2 million in diamonds if he will help Lytton to capture the time vessel. The two track down Bates and Stratton, who have failed attempts of cyber conversion and have had their arms and legs replaced by mechanical equivalents. The four agree to work together to escape Telos. The Doctor is imprisoned in a cold storage room with Flast, the former leader of the Cryons. She reveals that the Cybermen intend to prevent their original homeworld of Mondas from being destroyed by using their time ship to divert Halley's comet into the Earth, which will then be incapable of protecting itself from an attack by Mondas in 1986. I may have mentioned before that Attack of the Cybermen is my favourite Cyberman and story overall. Despite its reputation amongst the fandom, this story is high on entertainment with great production values and is never boring for me. Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor, for me, is on top form and is much better characterised here than he is in the Twin Dilemma. While he is still a little unstable...
Unstable? Unstable? Unstable?
He still feels like a man of science, temperament and passion.
And a very loud voice.
I find it odd to hear from fans that the Sixth Doctor only started to get compassionate towards the end of his era, but I strongly disagree here. Sure, he does have sarcastic banter with Perry, but I honestly think it's pretty funny. I know people take issue with him beating up the policemen and shooting up the Cybermen, but it's no different to the Third Doctor using Venusian karate in my opinion. I even love it when he plays good cop bad cop with Perry when holding a gun to Russell.
Shoot him, Perry.
For real?
Yeah, shoot him.
He's witty and callous, but it is undeniably alien. Furthermore, he shows his compassion very well in Part 2 when he is in prison with Flask the Cryon.
Wait, watch, and learn. If I do get it open, what happens to you? You can't leave here. The warmth in the corridor will kill you.
This is exactly what we need to balance out with the bombastic Doctor we know, and I think it is achieved really well in this story. I even love his anger at being used as a pawn in the Time Lord's plan to prevent the Cybermen changing history without him even realising it.
Wait a minute. No! No, not me! You haven't manoeuvred me into this mess just so that I can get you out of it! It would have helped if I had known what was going on!
You are a Time Lord?
Yes, and at the moment a rather angry one.
In retrospect, you could see this as appropriate setup for the trial of a Time Lord. Also, hot take coming up here. This story should have been the Sixth Doctor's first. I would have cut the Twin Dilemma completely and started with this one. For me, it establishes the Sixth Doctor much better than that story. Just replace the line bleakness of Gioconda with bleakness of Androzani and we are a go, and just establish that he chose his costume off screen and not question it at all. Regardless, Colin Baker I think is on top form here and is a severely underrated Doctor, I think even on TV. Furthermore, this story establishes the Sixth Doctor and Perry's relationship much better. There is sarcastic banter between the two, but you can tell they are starting to care for one another.
I suddenly feel conspicuous.
I'm not surprised in that coat. I mean, they don't all have 10 heads and want to take over the world.
Precisely. The poor thing may be trapped here, terrified. If it is, I can do something about it.
Never do such a stupid thing again. I could have killed you.
Believe you.
Don't patronize me.
I wouldn't dare.
Well, I was thinking too. You know that man we found back there? Do you think the alien killed him? And if he did, how do you think it'll respond to us?
With gratitude. After all, I do have the means of getting it off this planet.
Well, I hope it believes you.
Well, if it doesn't, I shall beat it into submission with my charm. Come on.
Already I think both Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant have terrific chemistry, and they're still great friends to this day. Her scenes with the Cryons are probably her best scenes, as she shows real concern over the fate of Earth. Now, when you think about it, this is the first time that Perry has seen the Earth directly under threat, as her previous 3 stories took place on alien planets, but now it's her planet that is being directly threatened. There is probably too much going on in the story for Perry to have any standout moments, but I think she's still a great asset, though it's absolutely nothing to do with her outfit. Attack of the Cybermen is blessed with a terrific supporting cast. Maurice Colburn returns once again to play Lytton, and he's great here. He constantly belittles his minions, and it's just really funny.
I used to use one of these when I worked for the council.
This time it's a swinging, not lineal.
How thick is it?
Less than you.
You said you came from Fulham.
You know, Griffiths, when I look at you, I often wonder why our ancestors bothered to climb out of the primordial slime.
That sounds like another insult, Mr. Lytton.
The almost deadpan delivery of those lines is what makes it so witty for me. He's given much more to do here than in Resurrection of the Daleks, and I'm all for that. While Lytton is more or less a higher criminal, I did feel a lot of sympathy for him when he was converted. I think his revelation as a hero is a surprise, but it's not too jarring for me, as Colburn's performance has been adjusted suitably for me to make this plot point very plausible. I think there was a lot of potential for Lytton to be a companion. It would have been interesting to see a trained killer that the Doctor makes his responsibility, and who learns compassion during his travels in time with the Doctor, but that's just my own fanfiction. Regardless, Maurice Colburn is great in this story, and it's such a shame he passed away only 4 years after this story was made, and was apparently very quiet and gentle as a man. It just makes his tough performance all the more impressive for me. Brian Glover plays the criminal Griffiths, and he's more or less the fish out of water, and I love how he just tries to take it in his stride, and he's obviously an idiot, but so down to earth that you almost forget that he's a small-time crook.
Look, I'm finding all this a bit disturbing. Cybermen, now Daleks, time travel in an organ.
You'll get used to it.
Terry Malloy plays the undercover cop Russell. Fans will obviously know Malloy as Davros, but I like how he's given the chance to play a completely different role. I'm willing to bet if it was any other day he would have caught Lytton, but because the Doctor and Perry get involved, they just show him up, and this exchange is brilliant.
Who are you?
I've already told you. I am known as the Doctor. I'm also a Time Lord. From the planet Gallifrey, in the constellation of Castorberus.
You're bonkers.
That's debatable. And what are you doing down here?
Robbing a diamond merchant's.
Thought the police were supposed to uphold the law.
Oh, they do. Most of the time. You murder a police officer, you get 30 years!
Handful of heartbeats to a Time Lord.
Jonathan David and Michael Atwell play Stratton and Bates, and they're a very entertaining double act. Stratton is mild-mannered and hesitant, while Bates is a guy you don't want to mess with, and the performances are very strong.
Believe it. They're working as if nothing had happened. Why didn't any of them try to escape? They know the situation.
Maybe they know more than us. Or they got more sense.
Sense? Sense! You moron!
Playing angry can come across as pretty hammy, but Atwell plays it really well here. Their converted arms and legs is such a great idea. The cybernetic arm we see in Part 2 is terrific, and it makes perfect sense why they'd be able to take down some Cybermen, as they have the strength to. While the cut to Telos in Part 1 can be jarring, the characters are so well performed that I couldn't help take an interest, as it's a reminder of the step-by-step process of cyber conversion. The Cybermen in this story I think are, for lack of a better word, excellent. These Cybermen convey many times in the story just how strong they are. A lot of the times they use brute strength and even torture their victims. I mean, just watch. Okay, that might be the most violent moment I have ever seen in Doctor Who. Now, granted you don't hear any bones crack, but it perfectly conveys just how strong these creatures are. Furthermore, while the chin has been sprayed over so you can't see the mouth like you did in Earthshock, the horror of cyber conversion is still on full display here. I love how in the background of the sewers and Telos set you can see people being converted into Cybermen. It's a way of assimilating humans into Cybermen in a way we've never seen before in the programme, and it's great that towards the end of the classic series we finally get to see it in explicit detail. The costumes continue to look fantastic, and one detail I do like is the black stealth Cybermen that we see in the sewers. The black paint job makes them look like silhouettes, and it's very effective, especially with their reveal. The story doesn't really delve into the psychological aspect of the Cybermen, but just through the visuals alone, it shows how you're ripped of your own humanity piece by piece, by first replacing limbs, men held in a vice by technology, and then voices becoming distorted. Litton's conversion at the end is the best realisation of cyber conversion I've seen in the series, and I'd love to see it explored more. The Kryons as aliens I think are an interesting race, and I certainly don't find them too camp. The actresses playing them give strong performances, and they don't ham it up too much for them to be too silly. They have compassion, wit, and even fight when they need to. My favourite has to be Flass, the leader of the Kryons. Her demise is really tragic when you think about it. She has accepted her fate that the Cybermen have conquered Telos, but will obviously do anything to sabotage their plans, even if it means her own death. The scene where she takes the sonic lance to heat up the Vasteel is really good. There's no dialogue, and the long and slow camera movements are terrific. She's accepted that her death is now a ticking time bomb, but at least it will be quick. Until the Cybermen break in and let her boil to death. I mean, damn, that is just sadistic. If I had one criticism about the Kryons, it is the long fingernails. They're just too camp for me. You almost wonder how do they even hold their weapons. Nevertheless, I think the Kryons are a welcome addition to the story, and it is nice to see an alien race that isn't always hostile, and I would love to see this Cybermen-Kryon conflict explored more in a future story. Director Matthew Robinson is behind the camera once again as our director, and like with Resurrection of the Daleks, the story once again looks brilliant. The Telos surface scenes look fantastic, as the desaturated colour created in post-production gives the impression that this is a cold alien planet and looks way more expensive than it really does. This is what it looked like unfiltered on location, and this is the after effect. It's very impressive, and it definitely looks above and beyond your average quarry. The action scenes are very well staged, as Robinson would work closely with cameraman Godfrey Johnson for control over his shots. He shoots very much from the ground, giving the Cybermen a very imposing feel, and it's so effective. The quick editing for the action scenes works brilliantly, as when you're in a fight you rely on gut instinct, and I think Robinson achieved that with success. The tomb sets have received criticism for not being as impressive or looking anything like the tombs from Tomb of the Cybermen in 1967, but personally this criticism doesn't bother me too much, as designer Marjorie Pratt probably would have given her own interpretation of Telos and not feel entirely adhered to the original sets. I don't think the tombs look particularly bad, and Robinson films them in really atmospheric ways. Once again, the desaturated colour and even the dry ice make the tombs look impressive, as if you're inside a giant freezer, and you really feel like you're on an alien planet. Though the weakest set for me has to be the Cyber Controller set, as it's too brightly lit and feels too small compared to the Cyber base in the sewers. The sets in the sewers look fantastic as well. It's perfectly lit, but you can still see everything that's going on, and the black Cyberman there really shines. Malcolm Clarke returns to compose for the series once again, and I'm glad he came back to score another Cyberman story, as the marching theme from Earthshock and the bell return to symbolise their presence once more. Clarke's original compositions for this serial have come under criticism for being too intrusive. However, similar to his work on the Sea Devils, I love this score as it's experimental and matches the character actions on screen, and you find it hard to tell if it's sound effects or music. I really like the theme used for Litton and his gang, as it's unshamedly 80s. The music for the Kryons is really nice as well, as it's a very softer and more eerie theme that contrasts very well against the hard and mechanical marching used for the Cybermen. I even unironically love this music. Now, I get people think that this is too camp, but it is supposed to be a reference to the sitcom Steptoe and Son, which is set in a junkyard. For me, I like the music that reflects what's going on screen as opposed to being just background noise, like when the Doctor goes back in the TARDIS and gestures to Perry. So daft how the music is in time with the Doctor's wagging finger that I just have to love it. Even Halley's Comet has its own theme. That music just gives it such a mystic and powerful feel that the comet has when it returns to Earth every 75 years. Only 40 years to go now. I can understand people finding this music too intrusive, but for me, I just love it. I first watched Attack of the Cybermen when I was 11 years old, and I instantly fell in love with it. and since then it has always been my favourite Doctor Who story. The continuity references didn't really bother me too much, as I had seen stories like Tomb of the Cybermen and The Invasion already, so I wasn't too confused. However, I can understand why viewers at the time would be put off by that, as repeats were rare during the 1980s, and the casual viewer probably wouldn't have remembered these stories. I think given these stories' releases on home media, maybe its reputation has been improved, as we now have every story at our disposal in some shape or form. Now, to conclude, I love Attack of the Cybermen. It has everything I love about Doctor Who: a confident leading man, a credible threat, superb direction, a brilliant supporting cast, and an experimental score. I could put this on whenever I want and would never be bored by this story. Having grown up and began to appreciate television production more, from a director's and actor's standpoint, I do think it holds up very well. It has my favourite monster realised terrifically on screen, and I can't praise it enough. Attack of the Cybermen will always hold a special place in my heart.